Hello everyone, this is the Archfiend, and today I want to talk about a topic that is sort of relevant to what I was doing yesterday. We got talking about 9/11 and people started talking about the Middle East, and this is something I've wanted to talk about for a while and something I've covered in my live shows before, and I've never really made a video about it, but I've always wanted to, so I figured the time is right and we're going to have a little discussion about oil. And not specifically just so much about oil itself, but countries that rely on oil wealth and just what the hell are they going to do when that oil wealth is gone? Now, it's something that a lot of people just really don't think about, or just they're not really that concerned about. Most people just want gas under $5 a gallon. As long as that's accomplished, you know, everything is good for the day. But there's a lot more to look at than just seeing the price of oil or wondering, you know, are we going to start using hybrid technology? Are cars going to be around 20 years from now? And just the things like that. Because shit could hit the fan in ways that people are really not thinking about. And I hate to be, you know, a doomsday sayer here, but I think the writing is pretty clear on the wall, and people just are not taking a potential shortage of oil crisis, or when nations run out of oil, they're not taking that viable option seriously. Now, I really don't feel the first world, countries like Germany, Japan, Great Britain, France, the United States, nations like that, have too awful much to worry about, and I'm going to get to all that in a second. But it's countries like Venezuela, Chile, the countries in South America that are relying on oil sales, countries in the Middle East, Iraq, Kuwait, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, all those nations out there that are so richly dependent on oil money. I gotta tell you, these countries are going to be up shit's creek without oil money. And I'm going to show you exactly why. I'm going to take one example here, which is one of the main exporters of oil, which is Saudi Arabia. What I have here is the official economic report for Saudi Arabia, and I'm going to break down things to put things into perspective here so people can see and understand what an oil-rich dependent nation does with its money and how screwed they will be without this money. Before I get into that, we all need to come to the understanding that oil is temporary. Oil, specifically in the nations that it's being taken from, is temporary. That is a fact. Estimates have a lot of these oil wells running out within 40 years. And that is some of the longer estimates. I've seen estimates as short as 10 years due to things like China becoming industrialized and becoming one of the biggest absorbers of exported oil in the countries that are out there now. So Saudi Arabia, like I said, is one of the prime examples because they are heavily dependent on foreign oil. Just to put things into perspective here, let me just find the exact numbers here. Alright, the petroleum sector accounts for roughly 45% of budget revenues in Saudi Arabia. What budget revenues are is money spent on basically anything. Any sort of road paving, any sort of civic service sector, like police, ambulance drivers, any sort of first responders, firemen, stuff like that. Alright? All of that, half of that I should say, 45%, is financed through petroleum. 90% of export earnings in Saudi Arabia is financed off of petroleum exports. 90%. Folks, when I saw a number like that, I was like, why are people in this country not panicked? Saudi Arabia, I should say. Why are people in the country of Saudi Arabia not panicked? Because when you have an economy that is based on petroleum exportation, and that temporary product under your sand is 90% of your export earnings, are you at all ever going to think about what you're going to do when that export earning is no longer there? Folks, this is earth-shattering, and I'm not making these numbers up. 90% of Saudi Arabia's export earnings. 10% comes from other sources. 10% comes from any sort of technology, if any they make, agriculture, automobiles, anything that, soccer balls, who knows? I really don't know what, actually let's find out. What do they make besides oil? The next leading labor force is, let's see here. Oh, what a surprise. It's agriculture, and it's a much higher number than I thought. 3.2%. 3.2% of the export cost comes from agriculture sales. So without oil, they have to rely heavily on agriculture. And it's whopping 3.2% of the gross domestic product. Wow. Now, the reason why I find this alarming, why I find this something that people should talk about and understand, is because when these nations lose this money, and they will, and it's going to be lost in a lot of our lifetimes, mine included, what are they going to do? You have a nation here that is very wealthy. Saudi Arabia is a very wealthy country. Their GDP is $592.8 billion. That is real deal economy right there. But when more than half of it is based on oil sales, what are you going to do for society, Saudi Arabia? What are all these oil-dependent nations going to do? I should say these oil-dependent exporting nations going to do. Because if you put things into perspective here, you have a society that is being very well provided for in Saudi Arabia. There's very nice communities there. Granted, there's 10% unemployment, so there's a lot of bad areas as well. But you have a society that's rather upper class. There's plenty of paved roads. There's plenty of transportation options available to you, a number of things like that to get you to and from. There's a very high class sector of people there. The problem is all those luxuries are financed more than half on oil money that they are dependent on. This whole region in South America and these countries in the Middle East that are dependent on exporting oil are dependent on basically nothing else. I mean, 90% people, I can't say that enough, 90%. What else is Saudi Arabia going to do? Sell soccer balls to the world? Furniture? What else are they going to do? Both of these areas, in areas like South America and the Middle East, they are very, very dependent on oil, but on top of that, they have nothing to fall back on that can even come remotely close to bringing in as much revenue as oil does. These areas are very deficient in technology. They invent very little and they advance very little technology. As a matter of fact, the reason why the first world makes so much money off of oil in these nations is because they don't even have the technology to get it out of the ground. They have to bring in third-party people from places like America, Great Britain, France, etc. to drill the oil out of the ground, refine it, and then they basically get the user fee of taking the oil out of their ground, while the first world countries reap the benefit of taking that oil out of the ground for them. Everyone gets rich, and there's a reason why the American oil industries are so wealthy without even having the majority of the oil taken from our own country here in America. It's because they have their hand in drilling the ground of all these nations, and they see the financial benefit from that. So, going back to the point I said before of why America and a lot of the first world countries don't have a lot to worry about as far as oil running out right away, is for a simple fact that all these nations, mainly in the first world, they've relied heavily on buying imported oil. America is listed as having some of the largest oil reserves in the world, some of which that are untapped up in Alaska right now. Why do you think that is? If we tap them right now, our oil prices would plummet. We'd probably be down to $1 a gallon per gas. Why wouldn't we do that? Folks, the answer is simple. When you create and control a commodity and you have the ability to produce that commodity, if you are the last one to do so, You control the entire market. Now, I think it's disgusting how Saudi Arabia handles their money, because a lot of the people that are heavy into the wealth of the oils, the Saudi royal family, for example, invests in numerous palaces. Now, granted, they do provide a lot for their citizens, to be fair. Like I said, a lot of the civil service sector is provided for and financed by that oil money. So the country as a whole is seeing a benefit from it. But the flagrant spending of money with all these palaces, all these cars, just like little random things like that that all add up over time. What are you going to do when that money's not rolling in and the society sees that the Saudi royal family each has 7 palaces while the civil service jobs are dropping off, public transportation dropping off, roads aren't being paved, and all of a sudden there's crime rates raising, unemployment raising, and on top of that, speaking of unemployment, another statistic that I found, or a number that I found, I should say, where was it here? Saudi Arabia employs 5.5 million foreign workers to work in the oil and service sectors. So 5.5 million people are brought in to work in the country's biggest money-producing sector. This is the equivalent of saying, oh, we'll go with America here, if the United States of America in the auto industry, will say, imported millions of Mexican day laborers to assemble cars so that they could hire them for cheaper labor. And granted, this is an area where you don't have set, what's the word I'm looking for, fees to pay people, minimum wage, there we go, that's an advanced word, why did I forget about that? You don't have set minimum wage, so Saudi Arabia relies on a lot of these foreign workers to come in that are non-Saudi to work for dirt cheap wages and work in these oil fields. Therefore, the Saudi royal family and anyone that has the hand in making and owning these oil fields gets more money. So that's nice of them. So Saudi Arabia could be helping out a lot more people in its own nation to work in these oil fields, to work in that civil service sector, but they choose to import millions of people to do that. That is just, that logic just baffles me. That logic just absolutely baffles me, and I know you're going to be like, well, Archfiend America uses millions of workers in the agricultural field in America. Well, yeah. The people that greatly get a profit from that are the farmers and the wholesalers that sell the food, but we're not relying on agriculture to run our economy. Saudi Arabia is relying on their sectors that they're financing or that they're getting to be manned by foreign workers. So, I think that this stuff is alarming, and most people don't care about it because, you know, it's the Middle East, it's South America, it's countries that, you know, aren't in our backyard here in America, but you need to realize that, you know, when strife just starts building up in society and then there's hatred, that just kind of crosses the realm of everything. These countries are going to start having revolutions. It's already happening in a number of countries. Libya and Egypt are a perfect example. Now, that might not be centristic to oil concerns, but that shows you these are volatile areas, and when the people get upset, they will revolt, much like anywhere else, much like in France, much like in England, much like in the United States. We've all had our revolutions. And folks, these are very powerful countries. These are right now, like Saudi Arabia is a very powerful country, both financially and with military might. This could get bloody scary on a number of levels when all of a sudden they don't have wealth. They don't have wealth to provide for as many police force workers, for as many just people that drive ambulances, fire trucks. All that stuff is going to start deteriorating once the oil wealth goes away, and the oil wealth will go away. And let me see, I was looking at the main industries here in Saudi Arabia. This is the ranking list of main industries in Saudi Arabia right now. Number 1 is crude oil production. That's a given. Number 2, petroleum refining. It goes hand in hand. Basic petrochemicals, okay, ammonia, which is also something you can get from refined oil. Industrial gases, something that you also get from oil. Sodium hydroxide, I didn't know what that was, I had to look it up, but it is something that it goes hand in hand with oil. And here we go. The first main industry in Saudi Arabia that isn't dependent on oil, cement. So, that is the first main industry Saudi Arabia has to rely on, but the cement industry was so big in Saudi Arabia because it was a big thriving economy for 30 plus years now, and they've had to do a lot of construction within that nation. So without the oil wealth to finance the building and just the infrastructure of all the cities, the cement industry is worthless. So the number one industry that isn't dependent on oil ends up being dependent on oil, and they're not going to have it anymore. Folks, this is a trend, and Saudi Arabia is not exclusive to this. A lot of these countries, like I said, in South America and in the Middle East are dependent on oil wealth. When that oil wealth goes away, they are not going to have money to provide for their people. Like I said, these aren't countries that rely on other things. Look at any first world nation. Germany, France, England, United States, Japan. They're heavy into technology. They're heavy into stuff like computers, cell phones, video games, stuff that's marketable on a worldwide scale. Food, liquor, you know, stuff that everyone wants. At least most everyone. Pornography. Hey, it's a thriving industry, and you know what? It doesn't rely on oil. All that stuff goes hand in hand, and all these first world nations are doing it right. Now, going back to the whole point of being the last to have oil, all these countries that are just getting like so uppity and just like so happy they have this wealth, where the hell are you guys going to be when the first world countries control all the oil? This change is already happening. We actually here in America just went from, we used to get a lot of our oil from Venezuela. They used to be, I do believe it was Venezuela or Chile used to be one of our #1 providers of oil. I just saw last year in 2010 the #1 importer to America of oil was Canada. That is the first time that a non-South American country that I saw on the list that it wasn't either ourselves or a foreign nation sending us the oil. And America has become this country that is dependent on exported oil. But like I said, it's mainly for the reason to use up everyone's resources so that we are the last to have that resource. I mean, I know a lot of people are like, well, we can't, you know, go drilling up in Alaska at that one area because like caribou or something are going to become extinct. Folks, if it gets to the point of keeping the gas under $5 a gallon or giving us oil which is going to decrease that, do you think people are going to give a shit in this country about some caribou getting extinct? Come on. Let's be realistic. Exactly. So, I don't know. This is something that I don't understand why people aren't concerned over this. I guess, like I said, it's because it's not in anyone's backyard, and the first world is going to be fine because without oil wealth, America will be fine. Other nations, not so much. Like I said, first world nations are doing it right. They're investing in technology. They're investing in getting tourism money. Do you hear anyone planning, you know, a big vacation? Like, how many times do you hear someone say, oh, I'm going to take a week-long vacation in Saudi Arabia? How many times do you hear someone say, I'm going to take a week-long vacation in France? Exactly. Not saying Saudi Arabia is not a nice country to go to, but they sure as hell don't seem to be invested on getting people to visit their nation. Tourism money is a big deal. Ask France. So, for the first world, everyone out there that's watching the first world country, don't worry, your economy is going to be fine. You'll see a little bit of a blip in your economy. Like I said, America won't exactly not be hurting without oil, and when eventually America uses up its oil resources, it will have to become dependent on something else. And that speaks to the whole technology end of things. America is one of the leaders, along with Japan, in hybrid technology. And when they have to shift to that, we will. We'll find ways to get energy. Trust me, people. There is a number of other ways. And like I said, they're basically being held on the back burner just to kind of run these other countries into the ground, it would seem. And it's kind of evil, but they're going to get their comeuppance soon enough, and if they want to be arrogant about the money they have now, well, that money is absolutely temporary, and people need to realize that. Sorry I made this ridiculously long. I know I'm on a trend of just like, getting on my soapbox and not shutting up here lately, but I hope you guys found this interesting, and I have a feeling that this is going to be one of those videos that people just pass over and don't care about, but 40 years down the road, a few people are going to look back in this video and go, God damn, that guy was right. Or maybe I'm dead wrong and oil will last forever. Yeah, that ain't happening. Have a great day, everyone.